Lorne Mackay placed an advertisement for a cook the same way he did everything else in his life. Efficiently, without sentiment, and with the faint assumption that whatever showed up would do. It was the spring of 1889. Lorne had been working his cattle ranch in the Peace River country of northern Alberta for 9 years, and in that time he had buried a dog, a horse, 2 hired hands to various accidents, and a wife who had lasted 14 months before the isolation took something from her that no amount of love could put back. He did not blame her. The Peace River country in winter is not a place that asks your permission. It simply arrives, and either you hold or you don't. Eleanor had not held. She had gone back to her sister in Hamilton, Ontario, and Lorne had watched the wagon carry her away and thought, with a clarity he was not proud of, that the hardest part would be finding someone who could cook the venison properly. He was not a sentimental man. He was also not, despite appearances, an unfeeling one. He was simply a man who had learned to store his feelings the way he stored his root vegetables, deep underground, where the frost couldn't reach them. The advertisement he placed in the Winnipeg Tribune read as follows. Needed. One experienced cook and housekeeper for working cattle ranch, Peace River, Alberta. Woman between 30 and 45. Must be capable of hard work and long winters, no complaints. Wages fair. Inquire Lorne Mackay, Fairview. He did not mention that the nearest town was 3 hours by horse. He did not mention that the ranch house had one window facing north and one facing west, and that for 6 weeks in January the sun never quite reached the kitchen. He mentioned wages were fair because they were. He mentioned no complaints because he had none to give and wanted none in return. What arrived on the first Tuesday of June, on the weekly supply wagon from Peace River, was a 38-year-old Scottish-Irish woman named Josephine Calder, who carried a canvas bag, a cast-iron pot that she had apparently refused to put in cargo, and an expression that suggested she had read the advertisement twice and had questions about the word fair. Lorne was at the corral when the wagon came. He walked over, wiped his hands on his trousers and said, "You must be the cook." Josephine Calder looked at him the way a woman looks at a crack in a foundation wall. Carefully to determine whether it's cosmetic or structural, she said, "And you must be the man who thinks no complaints is a selling point." Lorne had not expected that. He had expected a handshake, a yes sir, and a question about where to put her things. He said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "The kitchen's through the east door." Josephine said, "I'll find it." She did. And she found several other things as well. Things Lorne had stopped seeing because they had been there long enough to disappear. The skillet with the cracked handle, wired together and propped carefully so the wire wouldn't touch the flame. The flour tin with the bent lid that let moisture in. The section of roof over the wood box that wept mud in heavy rain. She found all of it within the first afternoon, and she said nothing about any of it. She simply set her cast-iron pot on the stove, made supper from what was in the larder, salt pork, dried beans, onions, and something she did with sage that Lorne could not name, and put it on the table at 6 o'clock without ceremony. Lorne ate half of it before he noticed he was doing it. He said. Josephine said, "I know." He was not used to that. He was not sure what to do with it. He finished the meal and went back to the barn, and he stood there in the dark with his hand on his horse's neck, thinking that the woman in his kitchen was either the most capable person he had hired in 9 years or a problem he hadn't anticipated. By morning, he had decided she was probably both. The terms had been set by letter before she arrived. Wages, duties, her own room off the kitchen, Sundays free afternoon. What had not been set was anything else. The anything else became apparent on her third morning, when Lorne came in for breakfast and found the cracked skillet replaced. Not with anything purchased. There had been no trip to town. She had found an old skillet in the smokehouse, cleaned it, reseasoned it, and it was sitting on the hook where the broken one had been. Lorne stood and looked at it. He said, "That was in the smokehouse." Josephine said, "It was in the smokehouse doing nothing useful. Your eggs are getting cold." He sat down, he ate the eggs. They were better than his eggs had been in 4 years. He did not say this, but he did not have to because Josephine was not cooking for compliments. She was cooking because the job was to cook and she intended to do it properly. And doing it properly meant not using a skillet held together by wire and goodwill. This is the thing I want you to understand about what happened between Lorne Mackay and Josephine Calder. It was not a story that announced itself. There was no moment where either of them looked up and saw something new in the other's eyes and understood that everything had changed. What there was instead was a long series of small things, each one unremarkable on its own, that accumulated the way snow accumulates, slowly, quietly, and then all at once you look out the window and the world has been transformed and you can't quite say when it happened. The first small thing was the skillet. The second was the window. Josephine had noticed within her first week that the north-facing kitchen window faced a wall of spruce that had grown up close to the house, and now blocked whatever light might have reached the glass. The spruces were 15 feet tall. They were not Lorne's to cut without reason. She did not ask him to cut them. Instead, on a Saturday afternoon while Lorne was mending fence in the far pasture, she borrowed the axe from the woodshed, cleared the 2 trees closest to the window, stacked the wood with the rest, and was back in the kitchen with flour on her hands when Lorne returned at dusk. He came in through the east door and stopped. The kitchen was bright in a way it had not been bright in years. The evening light came through the north window in long orange strips and lay across the table like something spilled. He stood in the doorway for a long time. He said, "You cut the spruces." Josephine said, "The others are fine where they are. You had extra wood anyway." He said nothing more, but the next morning without being asked he repaired the roof over the wood box. He used new shingles he had meant to put on the barn. He put them on the house instead, and when Josephine noticed, and she noticed, she did not comment. She simply made his coffee the way he had told her he liked it, strong enough to stand a spoon in, and set it on the table, and that was all. By July she was riding out with him twice a week to move the cattle to the north pasture. She had ridden horses in Manitoba as a girl, and while her style was not pretty, it was practical, and Lorne's cattle did not care about pretty. The first time she rode beside him without speaking for 40 minutes, he found himself oddly comfortable with the silence. Most people's silence felt like absence. Josephine's silence felt like presence, like she was paying attention. On the ride back that first evening she said, "Your far fence has a soft post. Third one from the spruce break on the east side. Won't make it through winter." Lorne had not noticed the post. He had ridden past it a dozen times. He said, "I'll fix it." She said, "I know." He did not know what to do with a woman who said "I know" the way other people said "thank you." It was not arrogance, he had decided by August. It was simply that she did not deal in uncertainty unless uncertainty was genuinely present. She knew what she knew and said so. She was uncertain about what she was uncertain about and said that too. At the end of July she had told him plainly that she was not experienced with the particular kind of mud that settled around northern Alberta fence posts after spring melt, and would he show her what he knew about sinking a new post that would hold? He had shown her. She had watched without interrupting and then done it correctly on her first try, and they had moved on, and that was all. He had not been shown how to teach someone something, and have it feel that uncomplicated before. It was in August that the first real thing happened between them, though neither named it at the time. Josephine had been at the ranch 8 weeks, when a late summer came up fast from the northwest, the kind that rolls off the mountains in an hour, and can flatten a tent before you finish looking at the sky. Lorne was fixing the soft fence post. He had not forgotten when the clouds came. He made it back to the ranch in time. The horses were in. The cattle were in the low pasture with shelter. But the kitchen garden that Josephine had put in along the south wall in her first week, tomatoes, beans, late kale, the small hopeful green things she had coaxed out of northern Alberta soil through sheer determination and manure she had asked Lorne to haul, was about to be flattened. When Lorne came through the kitchen door, he found it empty. Josephine was outside in the first hard rain, pulling up the beanstakes, tying down the kale with strips of cloth. She had apparently cut from an old flour sack, moving quickly and without panic through the kind of weather that makes most people stand at a window and feel helpless. Lorne did not stand at the window. He went out. They worked together for 20 minutes in the rain that turned to hail and then back to rain. They saved most of the beans and all of the kale. The tomatoes were a partial loss. When they came back inside, both of them soaked through. Josephine went directly to the stove to stoke it up, and Lorne went to the shelf where he kept a bottle of whisky he opened 3 times a year, and he poured 2 glasses and set one at her place at the table without a word. She sat down. She picked it up. She did not toast, she drank. He sat across from her and drank his own. Outside, the storm worked on the roof like it had something to prove. After a while she said, "The tomatoes that made it will be sweeter. Stresses that sometimes." He said, "I know." She looked at him, and for the first time since she arrived something in her expression shifted. Just slightly, just at the corner. And he thought she might be about to smile. She didn't. But the almost of it stayed in the room like the smell of the rain. I will tell you that this is the moment I keep coming back to when I think about Lorne and Josephine. Not the Christmas, not the letter, not the evening things were finally said plainly. It's that moment in the kitchen after the hail, with 2 glasses of whiskey, and a shared vocabulary of wet boots and saved kale and storms that don't ask your permission. That is where the thing between them actually began. Everything else was just the two of them slowly finding the words for what they already knew. September arrived the way it does in northern Alberta, with the abrupt authority of a door closing. 1 week warm, the next week not, and in between a single week of color so intense it felt personal, like the land was showing you something it usually kept private. The aspens along the creek went gold so fast it seemed like a decision. Josephine had never been this far north in autumn. She had grown up in the Qu'Appelle Valley in Saskatchewan, and spent her working years in Winnipeg and then Manitoba ranch country, and none of it had looked like this. On the 3rd Sunday of September, her afternoon free, Lorne came out of the barn and found her standing at the edge of the yard looking down toward the creek where the aspens were. Not going anywhere. Just standing there. He stopped a few feet away. He did not say anything because she was clearly not somewhere that needed interrupting. After a while she said, still looking at the trees, in Gaelic there is a word sianalis. My grandmother used it. It means a kind of longing for a place or a person that is not exactly grief and not exactly happiness. It's both things at once. When the aspens do this, that is what I feel. Lorne was quiet for a moment, then he said, in Norway they have a word, my mother wrote it in a letter once, skjemv, homesickness, but not for a place that exists anymore. For something you remember that is already gone. She turned to look at him then. She had not known he had Norwegian in him. He had not told her. There was a great deal he had not told her. She understood. Not because he was hiding it, but because no one had asked and he had not thought it worth offering. She said, your mother was Norwegian? He said, she came from Bergen, my father was from Inverness, I was born in Winnipeg. None of it feels like home except here, and some days even this doesn't. It was the longest thing he had said to another person in 2 years. He was not sure why he had said it. He was fairly sure it was because she had offered something honest and he had felt, without deciding to, that he should offer something honest back. Josephine looked at him for a long moment. She said, that was an honest answer, he said. Yes. She turned back to the aspens. After another while she said, this is home enough I think if you let it be. Lorne did not respond, but he stood beside her in the cold afternoon light, looking at the aspens, until the gold began to fade toward gray, and the evening started to move in from the north, and he did not go back to the barn, and she did not go back to the kitchen, and neither of them felt the need to explain why. October was hard work and not much else. The cattle needed to come down from the far pasture, the wood needed to be increased. The root cellar needed finishing because Josephine had looked at it in August and said the shelving was going to give way by December and she would prefer not to lose the preserves. Lorne had agreed, and they had spent 3 evenings in the root cellar side by side, him sawing and her driving nails with a precision that made him reconsider everything. He thought he knew about who should be doing the sawing and who should be driving the nails. She was better at the nails. He did not say this. He simply started handing her the hammer when the sawing was done. She did not comment on this either. She drove the nails. He held the boards straight. The shelves went in level. At the end of the 3rd evening she ran her hand along the edge of the top shelf and said, that will hold. She put her preserves on it the next morning. 14 jars of things she had been putting up since July. Saskatoon berry, highbush cranberry, spiced tomato, pickled bean. When Lorne opened the root cellar the following day to store potatoes, and saw the jars lined up on the shelf he had helped build, there was something in the sight of them that he couldn't account for. He stood there longer than he needed to. He was not a man who thought in terms of beauty. He thought in terms of function, of usefulness, of whether a thing would hold. But those jars, burgundy and gold and deep red in the light from the cellar lantern, on the shelf he had built with her, in the root cellar he had put in 9 years ago, when he still thought Eleanor might make a life here. There was something in all of that together that pulled at a part of him he had thought was no longer in use. He went back to work, but he thought about the jars. He was not in love with Josephine Calder. Not yet. He was something more preliminary than that. Something that doesn't have a proper word in English. That feeling of turning toward someone the way a plant turns toward light. Slowly and without thinking. And without quite realizing you are doing it at all. The thing that changed everything happened in November, and it happened because of a letter. Josephine received one from her sister in Regina, brought out by the supply wagon on the first Tuesday of the month. Lorne did not read it. It was not his business to read it, but he saw her face when she set it on the table after the wagon left, and he saw her face 2 hours later when she came in from the afternoon chores, and the two faces were not the same. He did not ask, it was not his way. But that evening after supper, while he was reading the almanac and she was mending something at the other end of the table, she said without looking up, my sister's husband has died, influenza. She has 3 children and no one to help her through the winter. Lorne set the almanac down. Josephine said, she has asked me to come. He said nothing for a moment. The lamp between them made a small circle of light. Outside the first real cold of the season had settled in, the kind that makes the logs in the walls tick and pop in the night, like the house is thinking. He said, will you go? She looked up then. It was the first time in 5 months that he had seen her uncertain. Not frightened, not sad exactly. Just in the presence of a decision that had no clean answer. She said, I don't know. He said, you should go. She said, you'll manage the winter alone. He said, I managed the winter before you came. She was quiet, then she said, yes, but you ate badly. He did not intend to laugh. It came out anyway, short and rough, like a sound he had forgotten he could make. Josephine looked at him with an expression he had not seen on her before. Something careful and a little soft, and he realized she had never heard him laugh before either. He said, I'll manage. She said, I'd come back in March. After the worst of it. He said, all right. She said, I'm not asking your permission. He said, I know. I'm telling you the kitchen will be here in March. She left on the supply wagon 2 weeks later. The morning she went, she had made enough bread to last 3 weeks and stacked it in the cold pantry with a cloth over it, and she had written on a piece of paper the exact recipe for the bean and salt pork stew she made twice a month, with a note at the bottom that said, "Don't let the sage burn. 5 minutes is enough." She put it on the kitchen shelf where he would find it. He found it that evening. He made the stew 4 times that winter. He let the sage burn once. He thought of her each time. She came back on the first Tuesday of March on the supply wagon, same as she had arrived. Lauren was at the corral when the wagon came, same as the first time. He walked over. She climbed down before the driver had fully stopped, which was also the same. She had a canvas bag and the cast iron pot. She looked at him. She said, "The kitchen survive?" He said, "Mostly." She said, "What did you break?" He said, "The flour tin lid." "I can't explain it." She said, "I'll have a look." She went in through the east door. He stood at the corral and put his hand on his horse's neck and stood there for a long moment, thinking that the yard had looked different all winter. And now he understood why, and he was not going to examine that understanding too closely just now. But that evening after supper, with the March dark pressed up against the windows and the stove going well, she put something on the table between them. A small parcel, paper wrapped, tied with cotton string. She said, "My sister found this in a box of her husband's things. She thought I might want it." It was a book. Small cloth bound, the pages soft from handling. Burns' Complete Poems. Scottish, he thought. Of course it was. He said, "Why are you giving it to me?" Josephine said, "Because you read the almanac and nothing else, and that is a waste of an intelligent man's winter. Also because there's a poem in there that I think you will understand, and I want to see your face when you read it." He said, "Which one?" She said, "You'll find it." He started reading it that night after she had gone to her room. He found it on the 37th page, a short poem he had never read before, and he sat with it for a long time. It was about the unexpected places where a person finds they belong. He did not know how she had known he would find that one, or why it would sit in his chest the way it did, heavy and warm at once, like a stone that has been in the sun. He set the book on the shelf above the almanac. He left it there all spring. In April, Josephine planted the kitchen garden again. Tomatoes first started inside in tins on the windowsill, the north-facing window that now got morning light because the 2 spruces were gone. She planted them with the same quiet efficiency she brought to everything, and Lorne watched her from the kitchen doorway one evening in the blue spring light, and felt something clarify inside him. The way water clarifies after the mud settles. He went out and stood beside her. She was pressing seeds into the soil she had turned that afternoon. She did not look up. He said, "I need to ask you something." She said, "All right," he said. "Will you stay?" She stopped pressing seeds. She did not look up immediately. She looked at her hands in the soil for a moment, and he could not see her expression, and there was a pause that lasted long enough to contain several futures before she looked up. She said, "Is that a question?" He said, "Yes." She said, "It didn't sound like one." He said, "Will you stay? Please." She looked at him for a long time. There was that thing he had first glimpsed the night of the hail, the almost smile, the thing at the corner of her expression that was not performed but simply there, quiet and real. She said, "I stayed through March, didn't I?" He said, "You came back in March. That's different." She said, "Is it?" He said, "Joe." It was the first time he had used her name without the full formal shape of it. Just that one syllable, and something in it was different from anything he had said before, and both of them understood that. She said, "Yes, I'll stay." She went back to pressing seeds. He stood beside her in the dirt until the light went, and then they went inside and she made tea and he read 3 pages of Burns at the kitchen table while she wrote a letter to her sister, and neither of them said anything more about it, and neither of them needed to. They were married in June, by a circuit minister who rode 2 days to reach them. The witnesses were a hired man named Ferris, who was there for the summer, and the cook from the neighboring spread 7 miles east, a Finnish woman named Hannelore, who brought a braided bread and cried at the right moments. The ceremony was in the yard because the day was clear and too good to waste indoors. The cast iron pot was on the stove inside, with something in it that smelled of sage and did not burn. Lorne Mackay and Josephine Calder, Josephine Mackay after, ranched together in the Peace River country for 37 years. They had 3 children. Josephine taught them all to read with the same directness she brought to everything. Lorne taught them to work quietly and do it right. The kitchen garden grew larger every year until it wrapped entirely around the south and east walls of the house. There were eventually 4 shelves of preserves in the root cellar, and the jars were always burgundy and gold and deep red in the lantern light. And Lorne always stood a moment too long when he went down to get something. The Burns' Complete Poems stayed on the shelf above the almanac until Lorne died in 1931 at 74 years old. Josephine lived until 1944 when she was 92. She is buried beside him on the rise above the ranch, where on clear days you can see both the creek with the aspens and the mountains to the west. And in September, when the aspens turn gold, the light comes over the rise and touches everything in the yard, including the kitchen window, which still faces north. He placed an advertisement for a cook. She arrived having read it twice and having questions. And what they built was nothing either of them had advertised for. I've thought for a long time about which moment was the one. The moment when the arrangement became something else entirely. Not the whiskey after the hail, though that was close. Not the aspens, though that was closer. I keep landing on the same answer. It was when he handed her the hammer. No ceremony, no declaration. Just a man who looked at what was true and adjusted accordingly. And a woman who took the hammer and drove the nail straight. That kind of love doesn't arrive, it accumulates. And if you're paying attention, if you're the kind of person who notices a soft fence post, who drives a nail level, who saves the kale in a hailstorm without being asked, you might look up one day and find that it's been there for quite some time. What was the moment you knew forlorn? And if you know a love that arrived quietly, through small things rather than grand ones, I'd like to hear about it.